All right, today we're going to talk about seventh chords, and specifically we're going to talk about dominant seventh chords. What I mean by a dominant seventh chord is a letter followed by a number. All right, you'll see like A7 or B7 or G7, nothing in between. You may also see something like C major 7 or D minor seventh. We're not talking about those. We're talking about dominant sevenths. There's four different kinds of seventh chords, but today we're going to talk about the dominant ones. So that's what we're talking about. Letter followed by the number. So what is a seventh chord? Well, a seventh chord is, if you remember back in lesson whatever it was, 4 or 5, when we talked about chords and what consists of a chord is just a triad, right? 3 notes that make up the chord. For example, this is the D major chord, and in the D major chord we have D, F sharp, and A. In a seventh chord, we add one more note to that triad. Now, is it important that you know what note that is to play the D7th? No, not really, but if you're into chord theory and you want to know what that is, there's a couple ways to find it. Maybe the easiest is just to use your circle of fifths. So in the case of the D, just go back 2. So the note that we're going to add for the D7th is going to be the C. If you're looking for what note to add to the E major, the notes in the E major, count back 2, and it's going to be note D. The other way, if you really wanted to, is you could find the note on your fretboard for like D, then count up 10 semitones, or 10 frets, right? Because we know that each space between the frets is a semitone. You could count up 10 on the D string, and you're going to find note C. So that's the way, but that's really not too important on unless, like I said, you're into music theory and you want to know what that note is. It's the 7th degree or the 7th interval of the scale. So for the D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Anyway, that's how that works. All right, but let's talk about the characteristics and the tonal characteristics of the seventh chords, the dominant seventh chords. You know how we have the majors are considered to be like happy. The majors are happy chords, and then the minors, like A minor, that's a sad chord. A major is happy, A minor is sad. Well, the seventh chords are called tension chords because they bring a level of tension to the music. Now, don't worry too much about the chord shapes. We'll get into that in a minute. But let me just kind of demonstrate that. So here's D major. Here's D7th. Feel that that tension? There's tension in the music and the tone. Here's C major. Here's C7th. There's tension. Hope you can feel that. All right, now since there's tension, the seventh chords want to release that tension musically to another chord. And that another chord is going to be a major chord called the release chord. And the way you find the release chord is if you use the circle of fifths again, for example, the D7th, you just go back one space. The D7 will release to the G major. The G7th will release to the C major, and the C7th to the F major, etc., and so forth. All right. The other way to do that is just mentally count up 3. You can accomplish the same thing. If you're playing a D7th and you want to know where you're going to be going with that, you just count up D, E, F. I'm going to the G next. And that's exactly what happens. We can use this information, this relationship between tension chords and release chords. If you're playing you're playing along in a song and the song calls for a seventh chord. So we're playing, say we're playing an A, and then we go to a D7. 9 times out of 10, you're going to know, or you can figure out what the next chord you're going to be playing is, because it's going to want to release to that release chord. So if I'm playing a D7, I don't even have to look at the music. I know the next chord is going to be a G7 or a G major, because that tension played by the 7th is going to want to release. Same thing with a C7. If I'm playing a C7, I know the next chord is going to be an F major. So that's how this whole concept of tension chords and release chords work. Now there's an exception to that, in that if you're playing a 7th chord and it's not going to release to another major, it's going to release to another 7th chord. So you can play an endless supply of 7th chord to 7th chord to 7th chord, but eventually one of those 7th chords is going to release to a major, because it's going to be tension, 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 and it wants to release. So it's going to find that natural release chord. I'm going to kind of illustrate this in blues music. Plays a lot of 7th chords. So I could be playing like a, don't worry about the chord shapes, because we'll get to those in a little bit. But I could be playing this kind of a thing. So I'm just playing 7th chords. And you can play those, but eventually it will release to its release chord, which again is going to be a major chord. All right, now the last thing about 7th chords that I want to tell you about is, and this is by no way, shape, or form to diminish, which I shouldn't use that word because there are diminished chords, but to lessen playing 7th chords or not, because 7th chords are really nice. They add a little spice and flavor to the music, but because they're so similar, I mean, there are 4 notes and 3 of those notes are the same as the major. If you're playing a song and you come to a 7th chord and for whatever reason you haven't learned it yet, or it's an uncomfortable chord to play, like for example the D7, say you just having trouble with that, but you still want to play the song, because these chords are so similar, instead of playing the 7th chord that's indicated, you can play the major chord. So if I was playing an A and the song wants me to go to a D7th, but I still haven't gotten the D7th shape down, I could play the major. Okay, but 7th chords are really pretty easy to play, because most of the time all we're doing is we're going to be taking a finger away, or we're going to be adding a string or a finger to the chord. There will be some that will have different chord shapes, but the 7th chords are actually pretty easy to play. So then let's get into them.